Fallout New Vegas has many Easter eggs and nods to real-world history and pop culture. But what about Caesar's Legion? Well, yes, it has its own, some obvious, others surprisingly deep, and many of them involve arcade Gannon.
What a load of Brahmin shit!
So let's dive in, profligates, and see what we can find. Also, plenty of spoilers ahead, you have been warned. Romans go home! If you have the Wild Wasteland trait on the side of Cottonwood Cove headquarters near the slave pens, you'll see Romanes eunt domus painted on the wall. This is a nod to the well-known scene from the Monty Python's The Life of Brian, where Brian is trying to write Romans go home on a wall. The correct Latin for this is Romani ite domum, but as we all know, Brian
is a very naughty boy!
As a result, he clearly didn't pay much attention in school. When a centurion catches him, he's not very happy with Brian murdering the Latin language. So he corrects the errors word by word and then makes him write the phrase 100 times.
Finished! Right. Now don't do it again.
This is probably the most well-known Legion Easter egg, and I think it's also the only Wild Wasteland encounter that's directly connected to the Legion. If you know of any others, please let me know in the comments. The Bill of Sale. In the side quest, One for My Baby, inside Novak's Dino Delights lobby, you'll find the bill of sale for Boone's wife. It proves that Jeannie Mae Crawford sold Carla Boone to the Legion, and as you'd expect, Boone is not very happy when he learns about it. The bill of sale also mentions two names, M. Licinius Crassus as the consul officiorum ab formulatus and M. Scribonius Libo Drusus as his representative. Consul officiorum ab formulatus roughly translates to consul or head of the offices of slavery. I'm not exactly a classical literature scholar here, but to me the Latin sounds a bit fuzzy, and this is a problem we'll see with other Legion Easter eggs later on. And obviously this is a Fallout game, I don't expect any perfection here. Also, this could be intentional, maybe the devs are using these errors to make fun of the Legion, who knows? As for the names, both are real Roman names, but the standout is M. Licinius Crassus, which is Marcus Licinius Crassus, a consul during Caesar's era and the richest man in Rome. He made his fortune by buying property during Sulla's proscriptions and also had a private fire brigade that saved buildings, but only after their owners sold them to him for pennies. Crassus' end was less glorious. His army was defeated at the Battle of Carrhae by the Parthians, and according to ancient sources, they executed him by pouring molten gold down his throat. And yes, if this sounds familiar to Game of Thrones fans, this was the inspiration for Viserys Targaryen's death, the Legion coins. The Legion has two types of coins in game, the denarius and the aureus. On the silver denarius, one side shows Caesar as a young man with the words Caesar Dictator. On the reverse we see Caesar, Joshua Graham and Bill Calhoun with the phrase Magnum Chasma or Great Abyss, commemorating Caesar's journey to the Grand Canyon. This design follows a real pattern where the ruler's portrait is on one side and the symbols or victories are on the other. We even have some real-world historical Caesar denarii with the inscription Caesar Dictator on them. On the gold aureus, one side has an older Caesar with the phrase Aeternit Imperii, which means for the eternity of the empire. The other side shows the Legion bull with Pax per Bellum, which translates to peace through war. Although we do have gold coins with Caesar on them, they were made after his death by Augustus, and the phrase Aeternit Imperii appears on coins of later emperors such as Septimus Severus and Carus, centuries after Caesar. Pax per Bellum comes from De Re Militari, a 4th century treatise on Roman warfare by Vegetius, and it was never used on Roman coins. The developers even planned for a commemorative coin that didn't make it into the game, showing a defeated General Oliver on one side. This is similar to the Julius Caesar denarii with the head of Vercingetorix, the Gallic leader who surrendered in 52 BC. He was imprisoned for 6 years, then paraded in Caesar's triumph in 46 BC before getting ceremonially strangled at the Temple of Jupiter. Fortune favors the brave. At the end of Arcade Gannon's companion quest for Auld Lang Syne, when you exit the Remnant's bunker, if you are not with the Legion and he decided not to join the Hoover Dam fight, he will walk up to you, hand you his Tesla armor, and sign off with this.
I may not be the one to help stop him here, but you are. Fortis fortuna adiuvat. Good luck. And goodbye.
Fortis fortuna adiuvat means fortune favors the brave. The phrase is based on a common Roman proverb that appears in the works of several well-known authors like Pliny the Younger. The version of the phrase that Arcade uses here doesn't come from some military history book or some famous speech. It's from the 161 BC comedy play Phormio by Terence. It is the story of a dodgy dude that helps two guys keep the women they love by outsmarting anyone that gets in their way. It's not exactly something that's going to inspire acts of bravery and heroism, but because the line was used by many authors over the centuries in a more serious context, eventually it gained popularity. Nevertheless, today it's a popular maxim for many military forces and units around the world. You can also find it in the coats of arms of noble families, and it's also tattooed in the back of John Wick. The Legion banner. Everywhere the Legion has presence, you'll see the red banner with the bull. You will also find the same symbol on the aureus, the gold Legion coin, and on the mark of Caesar, the medallion Vulpes Inculta gives you that grants safe passage to Caesar's camp. This symbol ties back to real Roman banners and Julius Caesar. Rome famously used the aquila, Jupiter's eagle, as its main symbol, but each Roman legion had its own emblem on its standard. While there's no direct statement about Julius Caesar adopting this symbol, there is plenty of evidence pointing that way. He came from the Julii family, who claimed descent from Venus, a goddess associated with the sign of the bull. The Julii also came from Bovillae, a town whose symbol was the bull. The bull appears on coins connected to Julius Caesar, and several legions he raised or commanded used the bull on their standard. So the game Caesar is probably right to link himself and the legion to the symbol. Interrogating Silus. At NCR's Camp Macaron, you'll find a captured legion centurion named Silus. He's being interrogated by Lieutenant Carrie Boyd, who asks you to help and lets you use any means necessary. If you have 8+ intelligence, during the interrogation you will get 3 special dialogue options, and each of them starts with a short Latin phrase. Corruptio optimi pessima is a medieval Latin proverb that means the corruption of the best is the worst, and it's mostly used in a Christian context. Essentially, here you say to Silus that his high status is making his position worse. Legum servis sumus means we are slaves of the law. It's from Cicero's Procluentio, and the full version of the quote says that we are slaves of the law so we can be free. Of course, the shortened line here is used to force Silus to obey the rules. Timeo Danaos edona ferentes means I fear the Greeks even bearing gifts, and it's from Virgil's Aeneid. It refers to the Trojan horse left as a gift outside Troy's gates. The Trojans brought it inside, allowing hidden soldiers to open the city to the Greek army at night. The phrase is still used today as a warning against trusting an enemy. Also, if you decide to attack Silus, he shouts,
Cato Nulli.
This means I yield to no one, and comes from Terminus, the Roman god of boundaries, whose boundary stones, according to legend, would not budge. But the exact wording used here is the motto of Erasmus, a 16th century Dutch humanist who also used Terminus as his personal emblem, erased from history. If you rank up enough Caesar Legion infamy, you'll trigger the side quest Beware the Wrath of Caesar. The quest description says, for aiding and abating the legion's enemies, you have been declared in Damnatio memoriae, an enemy of the legion in perpetuity. Many will seek your head as a trophy. Damnatio memoriae means condemnation of memory. It's the removal of someone's image and name from official records after their death or removal from power. Variants of the practice existed in many cultures. In Rome, the decision usually came from the Senate or the emperor, usually aimed at the previous emperor. Famous targets include Commodus, who was formally condemned, while others, like Nero, had their name erased without a clear senatorial decree. But here's the problem. Damnatio memoriae is posthumous. It's not putting a bounty on a living person's head. For that, you had to declare someone hostis publicus or public enemy, and that effectively made them fair game for everyone. Sulla, Marius, Mark Antony, Nero, even Julius Caesar were declared public enemy by the Senate, so not sure why the developers didn't choose that. Maybe it didn't sound cool enough? I don't know. In this sign you shall conquer. If you side with the legion, in your last meeting with Caesar before the Battle of Hoover Dam, he says to you,
In hoc signo taurus vinces.
This references the phrase in hoc signo vinces, or as I like to say, en teutonica. It means in this sign you shall conquer. According to the author Lactantius and Bishop Eusebius, Emperor Constantine saw this message together with the hero, the Greek initials of Jesus Christ, in the sky before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, and marked the initials on the shields of his army. He won the battle, and this led him to embrace Christianity. Caesar just throws inside the phrase the bull, which is the emblem of the legion. And again here we have what I think is a small problem with the Latin, but even as it is, you get the meaning. Nothing new under the sun. When you first talk to Arcade Gannon at the Mormon fort, he mentions his research, and if you ask him about it, he says,
I'm enthusiastic about helping people, but nihil novi sub sole.
The phrase comes from Ecclesiastes in the Vulgate, the Latin version of the Bible, and you can find references to it from Shakespeare's sonnets to the works of Jorge Luis Borges. Also later on, in the same first dialogue, when you ask him if he needs any help, he will redirect you to Julie Farkas and also warn you about the type of work she will assign to you.
I'm sure she can find something for you to do. It might be kind of depressing and terrible, though. Caveat Samaritanus.
This is a riff on caveat emptor, which means buyer beware. It is a warning to always check something before you buy it. The paraphrasing here means let the Samaritan beware, and he's just telling you to be careful if you want to be a do-gooder Samaritan for the followers. I always found it weird why Arcade chooses to throw Latin almost immediately in the first interaction he has with the player, so my guess is that they are there just for you to explore the connection that Caesar has with the followers of the Apocalypse from the follower's side. You also discover through this dialogue that Arcade Gannon shares Caesar's love of history, his tendency to repurpose famous Latin phrases, and also his opinion about the followers' work being mostly a waste of time. Interesting. Arcade and Caesar. Arcade tends to throw around a lot of historical references in Latin, and not surprisingly, most of them appear during discussions around Caesar. The first time you travel to the fort, if you have him as a companion, immediately he will stop you and ask you what you're doing. If you mention that you plan to strike Caesar, he will respond,
Et tu, mi amica?
This line is a paraphrase of Et tu, Brute, which means you too, Brutus, and comes from William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. It is the moment where Caesar recognizes Brutus among his killers. The real Caesar most probably didn't say anything because, he was being stabbed. Also, when you exit Caesar's tent, if you have +8 intelligence, you get a special dialogue option, and in his response, Arcade will say,
And it doesn't mean that we should sit by and nod our heads at every absurd faux Roman casus belli he can dream up.
Casus belli literally means an event of war, and it is used when justifying a declaration of war. Although the concept existed in Roman times, the connection of this phrase with its legal and diplomatic sense is relatively recent. Later on, you can eventually discover that Caesar has a brain tumor. This starts the quest Et tumor brute, where you have to find a way to cure it. Our good companion Arcade happens to be a doctor, and one way to cure the tumor is to sell him to Caesar as his personal physician. Of course, Arcade isn't exactly thrilled with the idea, and if you try to talk to him after you do it, he says,
Vitrix causa Deis placuit sed victa catoni.
This line is from Lucan's epic Pharsalia, which is about the civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, who represented the Roman Senate. It literally means the winning cause pleased the gods, but the lost cause pleased Cato. Pompey's army lost to Caesar at Pharsalus in 48 BC. Cato fought on the Senate side for the Republic. He was a Stoic, famous for his integrity, and took his own life at Utica in 46 BC. He chose to die rather to live under what he saw as Caesar's tyranny. So the quote says the gods, who weren't exactly bastions of virtue, favored Caesar's victory, but the moral high ground was with the principled Cato and the losing side. The phrase is often used for lost causes, although you'll be the judge of how noble some of them actually were. Also, if you talk to Arcade again, he says,
For as lack of adornment is said to become some women, so will this place, without your presence, bring delight.
This comes from Cicero's De Oratore, which is a treatise on the technique of rhetoric, and basically means that just as the lack of makeup suits some women, the use of plain words is much better than a bunch of flowery nonsense. This is basically a way for Arcade to tell you that he's done with you and that you should, well, piss off. Under the rose. At the end of the quest, The Whitewash, if you choose to keep Tom Anderson's secret, Arcade will comment,
Interesting way of handling things. Very sub rosa.
The expression sub rosa means under the rose and signals that something should remain secret. The symbolism comes from the myth where Aphrodite gave a rose to her son Eros. He in turn gave it to Harpocrates, the god of silence, to ensure that no one learned about his mother's escapades. Roman banquet rooms sometimes had roses painted on the ceiling as a reminder that words spoken under the influence of wine, sub vino, should also remain sub rosa. The phrase also appears in Christian symbolism around the secrecy of the confession. That is why you see roses sometimes carved on all confessionals. Caesar's reading list. This isn't in the game proper, but I think it's interesting. When you ask Caesar how he rose to power, he mentions he was an anthropologist and a linguist, and at some point he talks about how books proved to be very useful to him. He doesn't mention the titles in game, and I don't think they are ever spoken elsewhere. But the Fallout New Vegas official game guide, Collector's Edition, names 2 of them in an excerpt, describing how reading Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire consumed him for 2 weeks, and how Caesar's own Commentarii changed the boy's life. Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall covers Rome from the 2nd century AD to the fall of Constantinople in 1453 and is a hugely influential book. The Commentarii de Bello Gallico is Julius Caesar's account of the Gallic campaigns, roughly where today you'll find modern France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland. The legion structure and terminology suggest that Caesar probably read other sources too, but these are the only 2 titles I've seen explicitly mentioned anywhere. I also discovered a Fallout 4 mod that can add these 2 books in audio form as radio stations in your Pip-Boy. So I did a little experiment and managed to make my own version for Fallout New Vegas. There's obviously a lot more to talk about when it comes to the connection between the Roman Empire and Caesar's legion. I have several videos about this in my channel. And after making them, I discovered a few more things, so I think I need to revisit the subject. But currently I'm working on a video comparing New Vegas with the real Las Vegas. So if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and ave atque vale.